Welcome to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises. I'm Jon Paulien. I am a professor of religion at Loma Linda University, and with me is Guillermo Borda, a PhD student in the New Testament at Andrews University. With me also is Nick Snell, and he is one of the youth pastors of the Azure Hills Seventh-day Adventist Church. And also with me is Shifra Fepuleai, who is one of the youth pastors, or the youth pastor at the Campus Hill Seventh-day Adventist Church in Loma Linda. Delighted to have all of you with me today. And in our last program, we were finishing Revelation 12:17 and the concept of the remnant. And I think the program ended when you were making an important point, Guillermo. Would you like to rephrase that or elaborate as needed?
Yeah, I think that one lesson that we may see, because you mentioned that the Seventh-day Adventists or the Adventist pioneers saw certain characteristics of the remnant in the book of Revelation, and then they became like that they saw. I think an interesting phenomenon that I see in the book of Revelation, at least as I look in the text and considering the way it communicates its moral, in my opinion, the text has these moral exemplars, that embody different sets of virtues and different ways of being and living that conform with the Lamb and how one is to conquer as a true follower of the Lamb. But I think an interesting thing that I noticed in what you said that resonates with what I've seen in the text kind of throughout the book of Revelation or in different spots is that notion that as the Christian read the passage and use that admiration for a certain set of characters and desires to be like those characters, an interesting phenomenon may happen, which is that the people who live during a certain time where there's a certain group that is represented in the book of Revelation that is to be fulfilled in that time, the people who belong to that group, as they read Revelation, they seek to be like that, which is precisely representing them. So there is that sort of like a dance or an interaction between the symbol and what we generally call the referent, which is basically what the symbol is referring to or pointing to. So that interaction, which is very interesting, that happens. There's all sorts of implications that could be explored in there. But one thing I would like to leave with our listeners is that we should seek to be like these admirable exemplars that we find there. One example I would bring is, for example, the 144,000, which is that this kind of final remnant and the marks of faithfulness that they have as Christians seek to be there in that space or in that mode of existence representing Christ. What will happen is that there will come a time when we come to that moment of fulfillment, we'll be part of those that are part of that group. So basically, in that sense, we should live so as to fulfill the prophecy in our lives.
So if you embrace
living in that character.
Yeah, if you embrace the concept of the remnant as your own, it has a transforming power.
Yes.
You become a different person. You become like the concept that you admire. Shifra, you had a comment related to that.
Yeah, I mean, I deeply appreciate that explanation and just unpacking that, Guillermo. And I really do love a dynamic understanding and exposition of the Bible because it's not stagnant, right? Like truth is not stagnant. It's the most dynamic when you think of it as Jesus said, I am the truth, the way and the life. Like it's a person. And so that's so cool. Prophecy and its interaction with people, me today, that I can not necessarily read myself into the text like confirmation bias, but in the sense of like the symbol and the referent, the prophecy and the people, I can choose. Like Nick, your famous debut in the music world with the Lamb, the Lamb Wins album. I was so tickled when I saw that last night preparing for this on YouTube. Just shout out there again. I loved one of the song titles of the album. It was Choose Your Beast. That was so cool. Like, choose your beast, lamb or the dragon, you know? Are you going to choose the lamb or are you going to choose the dragon? And we see here in Revelation 12:17, the dragon is against this remnant. But then, you know, spoiler alert, we're going to see the lamb is with Jesus in Revelation 14 in Mount Zion. So that's really cool. Thank you. Those were my thoughts. I did want to ask maybe you, Jon, to clarify once again the difference between a historical remnant and a faithful remnant, especially in light of this eschatological remnant that unites the monotheistic religions.
Okay, yeah. So what the concept of remnant, if you take up any standpoint in history, you can detect three remnants from that standpoint. You can look back into the past, and you can see in your present institutions or bodies or denominations, whatever you want to call them, that represent something that God did in the past. Religion is a human response to God's mighty actions in the world. And so Judaism arose out of what God did in the Exodus, for example. So historical remnants are living, countable bodies that represent something God did way in the past. Faithful remnants are those within that historical remnant that still have the message, the mission, God's original intent is still fresh and active and alive. And those are invisible in the sense that only God knows who is truly faithful and who is not. Then looking forward from any point in history, you can see God doing something much broader, much bigger with that message, with that mission. So, for example, if we were to take Isaiah's day, the historical remnant of Isaiah is Israel, the Israel of the Exodus. The faithful remnant, though, the Israel of the Exodus is not all that faithful. The faithful remnant are those Israelites who stand with Isaiah in maintaining God's vision for Israel. The eschatological remnant, I mean, Isaiah added Egypt and he added Assyria, and then he branches out to all the nations of the world and come pouring back to Jerusalem. So he had this huge expansive vision of the future. So when you get to the book of Revelation, you apply that biblical template. If you're at the end of a Christian era, let's say your standpoint is today, and you look in the book of Revelation, there is a remnant that has this body of teachings, body of ideas that we looked at last time. There's no other body that has that except the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So to call the remnant of Revelation the Seventh-day Adventist Church is not inappropriate. At the same time, it is not arrogant either, because historical remnants, by definition, are not particularly faithful. They simply, by their existence, they remind the world of October 22 or something God did in the past. So you would ask, among the remnant of Revelation, historical remnant, who are the faithful ones? Who are the ones who truly understand and grasp that mission that God intended? Those would be the faithful remnant of today. And the eschatological remnant would be the potential that the remnant of Revelation has to become truly universal in an exciting way. And we looked last time at a way in which even the three great monotheistic religions could become engaged in what the remnant is all about. So I think Adventists in the past have always struggled with the idea, if we call ourselves the remnant church, it sounds so arrogant, so self-centered and so on. Well, no more so than Jews thinking in terms of the Exodus, or Catholics thinking in terms of the New Testament era as a founding place, or Lutherans talking about the Reformation. These are all human responses to what God has done in the past. All of them are flawed. All of them have faithful and unfaithful within them. But the key is that I think at the end of time, God is brought together a package of ideas and a mission that has the potential to transform the world before the end comes. And that's the exciting part. Whether you or I will be part of that mission is up to us, to be faithful to what Revelation is laying before us. Shifra.
It's so beautiful, and it really got me feeling hopeful. Like that understanding of remnant in the prophetic book of Revelation, it inspires me as someone from the generation, but also ministering to and with the generation of the younger people. So I was thinking for Nick, like if I could pick on you a little bit, not that I'm the moderator at all for this show, but I was just thinking, like, I was thinking, wow, you really do pastor with the younger Gen Zs, and have you also sensed this like anti-establishment culture among young people, and like institutions being like a trigger word? And so like having this understanding that just because there's this historical entity that you can look at and point and that go, that's a historical remnant, doesn't mean that's faithful. And how does like the clarity nuancing these two, I don't know, I felt hopeful. I was wondering what you felt as someone who's a colleague.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like every youth is different depending on the experience they have with the church, right? I am grateful that Azure Hills here is a healthy place for young people to grow up in the church. So I haven't had a whole lot of backlash against being, Adventist being called the remnant or anything. But the thing that I really appreciated I'm wanting to hold on to from what Dr. Paulien was saying is that the remnant, being part of the remnant, is a human response to what God has done. It's about God, and this is our response to him, just in worship, in following, in being a disciple. It's not like we came up with this on our own. It's a gift that we receive, and now it's a gift we extend to other people. So that's kind of what I'd like to hold on to and share with young people.
Yeah,
well, I think there was a famous missionary who said that there's a beggar who stumbled into a huge cache of bread. And he ran around to all of his fellow beggars saying, you got to go over here, down this street. There's this huge cache of bread. There's enough for everybody. That's what it is. There's nothing bragging about the fact, I'm the one that found the bread. So no, the bread is what it's all about. And if you've got the bread, God can do some amazing things.
I do have a question about that. So, because I guess maybe it's not clear in my mind. To me, I love that you said that a historical remnant has a track record of not being a faithful remnant. I reacted to
that is the biblical track record, yes.
And so I love that, and I lean into it because a lot of times discouragement in organized religion comes from seeing the flaws and the sins of human structure and of course human individuals, but the power plays of human structures that make up, say, like a historical remnant, right? Whether it's the historical remnant of Catholicism if you're a Protestant, or a Seventh-day Adventist church or movement or organization. But then if you say, hey, that doesn't necessarily, it just means there's a prophetic purpose there, a creation and a prophetic purpose of an existence in the history. That doesn't mean that they're faithful. All of a sudden membership in the entity makes you faithful. I like that, because then you still have the symbol and referent invitation to the call. The historical remnant is still the historical remnant, but that doesn't complete the faithful connection to the Lamb.
Yeah. As someone once put in the title of a book, don't sweat the small stuff. I think when you recognize the church is important, the organization is important. It's a way to bring efficiency and to get the message out in ways that individuals could not do. It's important. But if you sweat the small stuff that comes with it, if you sweat the dark side, if you get all focused on that, it can be very discouraging. And I'm grateful for the church. It has nurtured me, etc. But I don't expect that the church will not disappoint me at times. You know, I think we've all experienced that. And I would rather go to the younger generation and say, you know, embrace what God has done with the church. Embrace the message that it still bears, feebly and defectively. But don't let that get between you and Jesus. You know, if you're getting all burdened down with this issue and that issue, then it's dragging you down. That's not what the church was meant to do.
So we haven't yet seen a historical remnant remain faithful to the end.
Well, you tell me.
History far enough.
As you scan through the Bible, do you see any movement in the Bible that over the long term ended up faithful? I mean, the last one is the church of the first century. And the two churches today that can actually say we're in direct line, the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic, I think everyone would recognize as some serious flaws. That's just part of a biblical pattern. You don't trust in human institutions, no matter how well-meaning they are, no matter how God-focused they are. It's not the institution. It's God that matters, and it's the mission that matters, and it's the message that matters.
And I think that's the challenge to every institution, is to not become defined as completely institutional, right? Like the Adventist Church, one of our founding principles was the idea of progressive truth, right? That it's not just locked in and this is it, and now we just like, we have found it. We don't mess with it. Like, God is always revealing more to us. So it should be, like Schiffer used the word dynamic earlier. It's this ongoing process of discovering more and more light, rather than saying, oh, they figured it out back in the 1860s. Let's just run with that. And it's like, no, this thing has to progress. So we have not yet seen a historical remnant be a faithful remnant. And we are looking forward to that potential, like you were saying, of the eschatological remnant. And we get to choose if we're going to respond to that invitation to be that, to follow Jesus faithfully as disciples. So this is exciting, relevant stuff. This is so
and
cool.
It's a perfect segue, I think, to Revelation 13, because in Revelation 13, we're going to look at horrifying beasts. I mean, just the antithesis of what God is all about, the mirror images of Satan. But the first one we're going to see will have the face of Jesus. And what do you do with that? You know, when to all outward purposes, this is Jesus' face in the world, and yet Revelation does not treat it as being a positive thing. So it is possible. It is, if anything, it's the norm that human attempts to follow God, as they institutionalize, what happens is you become more and more focused on preserving the institution and less focused on the message and the mission. Happened to all the institutions thus far. Do I hope and do I pray that the Seventh-day Adventist Church will be an exception to that long history? Absolutely. But I cannot bank my eternal salvation on that being the case. So the reality is that human attempts to follow God all have their flaws, and that God is big enough and gracious enough to deal with it. Nick, take us into Revelation 13, because this group will never get there if we keep talking good stuff like this.
Oh, man.
Revelation 13, 1 to 5.
We're finding such great things. This is awesome. Let's read it. I'm reading
Prophetic
from
Surprises. That's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely. I'm reading from the New King James Version. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon, who gave authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" And he was given a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months.
So, what do you guys see here? What's going on?
Middle Ages.
I would like to begin with this idea of the beast, with the very basic idea of the beast. Just a background explanation of why is, I think it's important to soak our minds with the symbolic language of Revelation. And then we go into like what it may represent or not, right? And people may disagree with that, but I think that the book was meant to be absorbed both in as symbol and as referent, because there is such a, I think it's Elizabeth Schusler Fiorenza, if I'm not mistaken, that talks about the evocative language of the book of Revelation. And so we should never try to tame the language because it has a purpose. And it's very interesting. David De Silva wrote a book called Seeing Things John's Way on the rhetoric of the book of Revelation. It's such a great book. Shout out to David De Silva. I wish I had written that book. It's just means it's a very good book. That's what I mean. Very good book. My point is that he talks about how the book shapes the reactions of the audience. I mean, it kind of nurtures their emotional reactions to different institutions and different things. And the point is that if we tame the language, we'll miss the point of how the book is presenting, the vision is presenting certain entities throughout history as very evil and dangerous, right? It talks about this language of beast, and it's very interesting. The word thadion, translated here as beast, is always, from what I could track here, always used with a negative connotation in the book of Revelation. Always, every single time. And we just had an example just a little bit earlier in chapter 11, verse 7, when you have the beast that fights against the two witnesses in chapter 11. So we see a beast here with, no, it's not a good thing. Not a good thing at all.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So, and what else is negative about it? What do you see in the text that are really, really, this is not the good guy? How would you know this is not the good guy?
Worship.
He's labeled.
What's that?
He's labeled with a blasphemous name.
Blasphemous names. Yeah, that doesn't. In Revelation, that cannot be a good thing. Shifra.
And the affiliation with the dragon, which we already established in Revelation 12, is not a good thing.
All right. So it has 7 heads and 10 horns. The dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns.
Ooh.
And if you go out into the wilderness and you see 2 animals with 7 heads and 10 horns, you've discovered a new species. Or you're drinking, one or the other. But this is imagery. So it's clearly negative imagery.
Mm.
But here's where, remember I said, has the face of Jesus. Where does that come from? Well, in verse 1, we saw the 7 heads, the 10 horns. It looks just like the dragon. This beast is the mirror image of the dragon. What did Jesus say in the Gospel of John? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Whoa.
If you've seen the sea beast, you have seen the dragon. The dragon is Satan. So this is Satan's trinity. He says, I want to be like the Most High. I want to sit on the throne. I want to be like God. Revelation shows him pursuing his purpose. But get a load of this, right? Verse 2. All right. You've got this beast here, which builds from Daniel 7. You got the lion and the bear and the leopard. And this blasphemous names and so on. It's all the beasts, all the enemies of Daniel 7 are all stacked up in this one thing. And you say, man, this is really bad. But then it says he gets his power and throne and authority from who?
Again.
From the dragon. Okay. If you go to Matthew 28, Jesus says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me.
Wow.
So the sea beast gets his authority from the dragon. Jesus gets it from the Father. You see this sort of Father, Son, Trinity kind of package here. But lest you think this is confirmation bias, I like that phrase, so I'm going to use it again. Verse 3 is the killer. Okay? Because it says in the Greek, one of his heads was, as it were, slaughtered to death. The Greek word is esphagmenein, which means to be slaughtered. That word appears again a little bit later in verse 8, speaking of the lamb slaughtered from the foundation of the world.
Mercy.
This beast is reliving the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He has his cross. So you see what I was saying? You have this nasty, awful beast, but it has the face of Jesus. And it goes further. In verse 4, the statement is made, who is like the beast? Who can make war with him? Well, if you're familiar with your Hebrew, what does Michael mean in the Hebrew?
Who is like God.
Who is like God. All right. In chapter 12, you have Michael fighting against Satan. Here you have Satan adopting Michael's name as his own. And then to top it off in verse 5, this beast has authority for 42 months. How long is 42 months? 3.5 years. Who had a 3.5 year ministry in the New Testament?
My Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
That's right. Okay. So the point that I'm driving to is that this beast of Revelation 13 has the face of Jesus. There will come a time in history when the entity that represents Jesus to the world will actually be the dragon, when you strip away the surface. That is God's prophetic surprise, I think, for the end of this program, that this beast from the sea, called up by the dragon, is none other than an entity that takes the name of Christ as its own. And we'll start from there next time. You're not going to want to miss it. See you then. God bless.